Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Carter, and again, I am with the Reverend Sharpton. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, a little bit about our podcast, just briefly. Less than 5% of lawyers are Black. Less than 2.5% of lawyers are Black women. So it's important for us to have a podcast focusing on law and advocacy and politics because the percentages go down even further in terms of how many people we have representing us in the Senate and activists and things like that. So you are a unicorn just like I am in this profession, and so it's important for people to see people that look like us in these fields. Before we jump into the interview, because the interview is truly about you, this is the Juneteenth episode, but this interview is to get to know your journey. We consider you a Black superhero, so your journey on becoming this Black superhero. Just wanted to briefly get into two hot topics that you should already be familiar with. The first one being DEI and your recent efforts. Now, I know you did a buy-in with Costco. If you can explain to our audience that.
Coming out of our National Action Network National Convention in April, we put several companies on notice.
Okay.
Because they had said they were going to end their DEI programs.
Right.
Now, what a lot of people are missing in this is it was corporate America that started DEI. We were operating on what was fair and just from a civil rights perspective. When George Floyd happened, they started throwing all these things out. We're going to do this, diversity, equity, and inclusion. No civil rights group, none of us that were involved. We were at the forefront of the George Floyd movement. We had the biggest march that year in Washington. The family, I preached all of the funerals of George Floyd. So we didn't call on DEI, they did.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, Trump wins. Now you're going to stop what you committed. Wow. And we said, oh, no, now, wait a minute. Now, you're not going to play us like that. So that's why we put some companies on notice. Some activists in Minneapolis went after Target, and later some preachers picked that up in Georgia. We put Pepsi on notice and McDonald's and others that we are still negotiating with. But we also said we want to do something different. We're going to show for those that have the courage in the corporate world to not cancel DEI being intimidated by Trump, that we'll support you. So we took several hundred people to Costco's in Harlem. Mayor Ras Barak and I took them in Newark, New Jersey. We went 3 or 4 cities. Isn't it interesting that Costco's stock rose as Target's went down? So we've got to show that we've got the power to help you or hurt you. Absolutely. But we want to see a real program, committed program of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is not one way or another. That's top to bottom.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you're giving the explanation regarding what a buy-in is, because I think some people were not familiar with that. You spoke about George Floyd. That was going to be my next question to you. I know this is the 5th year anniversary. What do you think I know what George Floyd meant 5 years ago, because it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we literally watched someone die on our screens. It was extremely traumatic. So I know what it meant back then. What does it mean now? Because Congress still has not, I know they passed the Asian hate bill, but they didn't quite pass the George Floyd bill. So what does George Floyd's death 5 years later mean?
Well, I think that it is one of those points in history that brings everybody's attention back to an issue. If you look at Emmett Till in 1955, I was just less than 1 year old. It was a pivotal point. It didn't change anything then. But a year later, a lady sat in the front of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, named Rosa Parks.
She sure did.
And Rosa Parks said when they told her to get up and move, she thought about Emmett Till. You go from 55 bus boycott. It took them to 64, 9 years later, to get the Civil Rights Act. Then you go after voting rights. They got beat on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis, Hosea Williams, Amelia Boykin, to get the Voting Rights Act. March on Washington, we all salute great Iowa Dream, March on Washington, August 63. 2 months later, they bombed a church in Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church, and killed 4 little girls. So with George Floyd is the reminding tragedies that should move us forward. We're 5 years after. We still are not as long as it took to get the Civil Rights Act after Emmett Till. So you fight till you win. You don't fight saying, well, that ain't worked for a year or two. Look how long it took for the right wing to give us a Donald Trump. They started with the Tea Party, went in from there to birtherism, went in there to something else, then all the way to MAGA. They never stopped, and we have to be just as determined not to stop.
Absolutely. Speaking of not stopping, last hot topic, and then we'll get into your individual questions. The big topic in the last 2 weeks has been ICE and how Donald Trump, specifically in California, I believe deployed was it the National Guard? I want to say it was the military forces.
National Guard and then the Marines.
Yes, military forces against normal citizens. So my question to you is, just playing devil's advocate, some people say, well, aside from maybe the immigrants that are from African descent, if they're from Hispanic descent, that's not our fight. What are your thoughts about people saying that's not our fight? Because they say, oh, the majority of the Latinos voted for Trump, so this isn't our fight. What is your thoughts on that?
First of all, if you establish law, this is a lawyer's party. It does not. You can't codify law saying this is for only Hispanics. The law is going to be used for everybody. And when you look at the fact that Trump, in the middle of the deportations, said, I'm banning people from 19 countries. He started with Haiti and went all the way through Africa, which he called S-hole countries. So whatever they get away with establishing as law and policy for Latinos is automatically going to apply to blacks, Africans, Haitians, Caribbean. Right. And that's how you establish law. And so it is in many ways misinformed, or as I would say, ignorant. Not even ignorant, ignorant, to think that they can do that to them, that they're not going to use it as a test run to us.
Yes. I absolutely agree. I couldn't have said that any better. Well, again, this is a Juneteenth episode. You are a Black superhero of ours. I think some people think they know you and your journey, but this interview is to dig just a little deeper into that journey. Who were you before you were Reverend Al Sharpton? Like, who were you before the name and the activism? Who were you before that?
Well, I really couldn't answer that because I've never really been anybody else. You know, I started preaching at 4 years old. I was a member of the Junior Usher Board in Washington Temple Church of God in Christ in Brooklyn. And the adult advisor, I remember her name, Hazel Griffin, asked all the kids, what do we want to do for the anniversary program? I said, I wanted to preach. And all the kids started laughing. She brought me to the bishop. He said, let him preach. They put me on a box. There was about 900 people there, and I started preaching. So I grew up a boy preacher. By the time I was 7, 8, Mahalia Jackson and all of the big gospel singers would come through our church, and they would let me preach, take me on the road. And then when I was 10 years old, we were living in Hollis, Queens, nice big corner house. My father left, abandoned us. So my mother held on as long as she could. They cut off the utilities, took her car, which was a Cadillac. We had to move to projects in Brooklyn. So I learned both experiences of what it was to be somewhat middle-class black and then in the hood. Having that experience taught me, wait a minute, why ain't they picking up the garbage? And all the guys in the projects would say, well, they pick it up on Saturday. But I lived out there where they picked it up every day. And on and on and on. And I think that's what started making me say things weren't fair. I started watching the news a lot because I didn't play a lot with other kids my age. I'm 11, 12. Because they found it awkward to play with a preacher that their mamas was going to hear preach on Sunday. You don't want to use foul language around a preacher. You might tell my mother. So I watched the news a lot, and I became enthralled with Adam Clay Powell, who was a preacher and a congressman. So I used to go up, try to sneak in to see him. He knew my bishop, and he let me hang around. So I started then. My mother got concerned because she was a fundamentalist Pentecostal.
Okay.
And she brought me to our Bishop Washington and said, I'm scared he's going to leave the church. He's been preaching now since he was 4, and I want him to stay in the church, and he's watching all this politics and civil rights. Mm-hmm. And Bishop Washington took me, we was at his house, took me across the street to a guy named Reverend William Jones. And Reverend Jones, he said, Bill Jones said, yeah. He said, you know the boy preacher? Yeah, I've heard of the boy preacher. He said, his mama's here and they're concerned he's going to leave the church. And Bill Jones said, I know what to do with him. Let's make him youth director of Operation Breadbasket, a chapter for Dr. King. I lead New York. And they made me youth director, introduced me to the national director, who was Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was then twice my age. He was 26, 27. I was 12, 13. And I've been ever since. So there never was a time I wasn't Reverend Al Sharpton.
I see, because I think I read that you were officially ordained at 10. You mentioned being with Mahalia Jackson. It's almost like a story you can't even make up. It's really unbelievable when you think about it. I mean, because you were so young. I look at I don't know if because they're pandemic babies or what, but I look at a 4-year-old now. I would not let a 4-year-old get up there and preach a sermon. I definitely think you were from a different time, and maybe you had an old spirit. Cause
it was a different
amazing.
time, maybe an old spirit. It would be something that I could not describe because it's natural to me. Whatever you do that's natural to you, how do you explain it? I don't know. And the same way, like right now, I tell people, and I'm sure some reporters don't believe it because they check and say he's right. I, to this day, cannot read a speech or sermon because I started speaking publicly before I could read and write.
Wow, that's true, because you were 4.
I was 4 years old. I was just getting ready to go into kindergarten, not even first grade. When I started my television show, Politics Nation with Al Sharpton, MSNBC.
Yes.
First few days, I was wrestling with a teleprompter, and they even made jokes on it Saturday Night Live. The president of the network came in and said, just put up the outline. He's extemporaneous. So I started doing my show, and the ratings went up. Because that's who I am.
Right. You didn't need it all written out.
I didn't need it all written out. When I did George Floyd's funeral,
no sermon. Just did it off the top of your head. Wow.
I did Michael Jackson's funeral, the eulogy. I did James Brown off the top of my head. But when I was doing the eulogy at George Floyd, I had in my mind, I said, like, these are 3 or 4 points what I want to do. I might write on a little paper outline, but nothing more than that. And while I was doing the eulogy, I looked down at George's casket and thinking about why is this resonating all over the world? Yes, the pandemic, everybody's locked down. I said, but there's another reason, is that when we saw that knee on George's neck, we all have had a knee on our neck. And I went through the whole thing, get your knee off our neck. That came extemporaneously. But that was the boy preacher that grew up still believing in what I'm going to say. That's why a lot of things that happen, I believe in impulse and to go ahead and do it. You have to have the courage to go ahead and try to do what your instincts tell you to do.
So with that being said, would you say, did you choose activism and advocacy, or do you think it chose you?
I think it chose me. I think that the fact that I happened to be in an environment that they could bring me to a Jesse Jackson or Bill Jones locked me in, because I could have had the choice of that, no avenue, and maybe got discouraged and done something else. So I always say to people, and it's a very good question you asked, is that if you look at your life, if you look at the natural trajectory of your life, you'll see where you're supposed to be headed. The things you did not decide, the things you didn't control. Sometimes, in my opinion as a preacher, God has a way of showing you your road rather than you trying to dig one for yourself. It's your natural flow.
That's true. And if you're finding, sometimes I tell people, if you're finding resistance, it may be because you're not supposed to be doing it. If you start doing what's in God's will, not to say that it'll be easy, but it definitely flows a lot differently when it's in His will.
Well, the reason it flows differently, and you're right, is that if you're doing something that's not supposed to be,
Okay.
you'll keep finding obstacles. If you do things that's in his will, the purpose that you were born for, you will have challenges. But you know why you will know that this is his will and your calling? You will still not give up. So I've had many attacks, many kinds, and I still kept getting up. I've said 1,000 times, this is crazy. I can do something else. I got close with James Brown in my teen years. I was close with I go in the entertainment promotion. I couldn't do it. So when you know your comfort zone is here, no matter how troubling it is, that's your calling.
That's your calling. Well, you mentioned James Brown. That was going to be my next question. Again, you have a very unbelievable life. The fact that you were so young. So you did Brooklyn College. I think you worked with Shirley Chisholm. Yeah. Then you toured. I mean, you did all this in a very, very short period of time. How did you meet James Brown and have him say, "You come on board and be my tour manager"? Again, you're such a young person at this point. People are really trusting you. I feel like with
what
such
happened
big things.
was there was a kid that came from Augusta, Georgia.
Okay.
Joined my youth group. I'm now 17 years old. Been leading the youth, and he joined my youth group. About 4 or 5, maybe 6 months later, I get a call from who was the biggest disc jockey in New York at the time. That's when AM radio was heavy, was hot, named Hank Spann. And Hank Spann says, Reverend Sharpton. I said, yes, sir. It's Hank Spann. He says, you had a young man join your youth group named Teddy? I said, yeah, he's from Georgia. He's a kid, got a little accent, you know. He said, well, got bad news. He got killed in a car accident. I said, really? He said, yeah, he was friends upstate New York. He says that I'm calling you because his father wants to do something in memory of him. And I told his father that he had joined your youth group. He should do a concert and give the scholarships or whatever he wants to do. I said, well, who was his father? He said, you don't know who Teddy was? I said, Teddy never said nothing about a father. He said his father, James Brown, Godfather Soul. And Teddy and I was the same age. So James Brown came to New York, did 2 shows at the Brooklyn Albee Theater, which is no longer there. It's now the Albee Mall, and gave my youth group the money. Oh, wow. And he looked at me, he said, you're ambitious. You're the same age Teddy was. He says, I'm going to help you with this youth group. 2 weeks later, he flew me to L.A. and had me give him an award on Soul Train. Now, being on Soul Train in 74, I'm then like 19, is like being on Meet the Press ×5. I mean, everybody. Right. Now, I'm the king of the king. And we developed this kind of bond. And I think because my father left at 10, he became a father figure I never had. And I became the son he just lost.
Oh, wow.
And he would always say, I promise your mother now you can't hang out. He would make me stay at the hotel. He stayed at the band, had to be in the hotel. Don't stay around the band. And he lectured me and would always say, this is not your life. You stay in the ministry. And he'd send me back and forth to do my youth group. The story that really defined our relationship is in 1982, we were fighting to get Dr. King's birthday made a holiday. And I was visiting him in Augusta because I would always go down. And I said, Mr. Brown, you close with these Republicans, because he was kind of conservative politically. I said, why don't you tell Reagan, who had just got elected, why don't you tell Reagan to give us that national holiday? And he said, hits the intercom, get the president off. I said, yeah, right. I'm like, okay. And it's about 11 in the morning. We leave, go out to eat, whatever we're going to do, come back. About 4, we back in his office, 4 o'clock. Intercom hits, said the White House is on the phone. And I'm looking like, okay. And he picks it up, talks a few minutes, he hangs up, he says, President invited me to come to January 15th, which is King Day, and talk about it. And you're going with me. I said, what? He said, you're going with me. January 11th, 12th comes, they call me from his office, they got a ticket for me at the airport, and James Brown, commanding as he was, made me fly over Washington, back to Augusta, and then back from Augusta to Washington with him. And we're on the plane going back to Washington. And he looks at me, he said, Reverend, he never called me anything but Reverend. He believed in titles, you had to call him Mr. Brown. And he said, why don't you do me favor when we land. I said, okay, what? James Brown, like my father now. He said, I'm going to take you by Bobby Bennett's shop. Why don't you do your hair like mine? I said, all right. And many people ask me why I had the styles, and now you'd have to grow up a single parent to understand. No man had ever asked me to emulate him. So this was a father-son thing. This man, big artist, wants me to be like him, because I'm an 18, 19-year-old kid.
Right.
So we went, got my hair done. Next day we go to White House, and I look like him, and we meet with the administration. Eventually they did do, not because of James Brown, Stevie Wonder them had a movement, they got the holiday. When we were going back to Augusta on the plane, he told me that you keep it like that till I die. Years later, when James Brown got in trouble and went to jail, he would call me from the jail every night and collect call from South Carolina Correction Facility.
Knew it was him.
Yeah. I accept. Right? Even though I don't know how I'm going to pay this phone bill. I said, I accept. And he said, Reverend, before he asked me about my daughters and all, because he was there, he said, how's your hair? I said, I didn't change it, Mr. Brown. And that was our bond. And I ended up preaching his funeral.
So tell me this. Was that song, Black and I'm Proud, was that during your time?
No, that was before. It was 68.
Before.
I'm talking 74. But that's why he was a hero to us.
Right.
James Brown made one record.
For activism.
He made one record that in my neighborhood, we stopped calling ourselves Negro and started calling ourselves Black because of that record. The culture defined it. And James Brown was that cultural figure for us. So that's why it became so important to me to have an embrace of him.
Now, I know you said that, again, you've been doing this since you were 4, so I guess there weren't too many people before you were 4, but you've worked with so many leaders like Coretta Scott King. I mean, you've worked with so many leaders. Would you point to anybody shaping your voice, or do you think your voice, for the most part, has always stayed the same? Or did you pull anything? Because sometimes people pull and say, I like that.
No, I got a lot from Jesse Jackson.
Okay, a lot from Jesse Jackson.
And we're still very close. If there was a dominant teacher in my activism, it was Jesse Jackson.
Okay.
Because James Brown couldn't teach me that. I would say James Brown was my father figure. Jesse was my mentor and teacher.
Amazing. Just like you work with a lot of leaders, you've also worked on too many cases to count. If there was, and I know it's going to be hard, but I'll give you 2. If there are 2 cases you would name, we want you around a lot more longer, but if you were to go tomorrow and you would want someone to talk about 2 cases connected to you, what would those 2 cases be?
I probably would say the case of Amadou Diallo.
Okay.
This young man from Guinea that was going in the vestry of his own building, stuck out his key, and the cops shot at him 41
Okay, I do remember that one.
And he got hit 19 and killed. And that was the time we could unite the whole community. Africans, West Indians, Caribbeans, blacks, march. We, for 13 days, would have sit-ins, get on our knee in front of the police plaza to get those cops indicted. And even the former mayor, Dave Dinkins, went to jail. Charles Rangel went to jail with us. That case stuck out to me because of the activism. We ended up the case losing, but we won a movement. And the second would be George Floyd. Okay. When I got that call from Ben Crump, who I had worked with on other cases, the pandemic was going on.
Yes.
And he said, the family's on the other side. Did you see this tape on TV? I said, yeah, Ben, we can't go nowhere. We watching the news all day.
Forced, yeah.
He said, they want to talk to you. So they hooked him in a 3-way conversation. And Falonda said, would you go to Minneapolis? We don't want them to burn. We want them to march, because there was riots going on.
Yeah.
And arrange for his funeral. I said, well, it's a pandemic. I don't know if I get a flight, but I'll try and get down there and join y'all. They said, oh, no, we in Houston. George was the only one in Minneapolis. The family lived in Houston. So I said, all right, let me figure this out. And I kept watching the tape on the news. It was like on and high rotation. And I kept thinking as he was yelling, I can't breathe. I thought about Eric Gardner, who said that here. And I called Robert Smith, the billionaire, and I said, how you doing? He said, I'm all right. I said, have you seen this tape in Minneapolis? He said, yeah, man, that's terrible. I said, I need a favor. He said, what? I said, would you let me have your plane?
I
to
figured that was the I figured that's what you were going to say.
And he said to me, let me see if my pilots will work during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And he called me back in a half hour and he said, they said if you wear a mask and agree to being tested and they'll wear a mask, they'll take you there and bring you back. I said, all right. He said, how many you got going with you? I said, my traveling buddy, and I'm going to call Eric Garner's mother. And I called Eric Garner's mother. She picked up the phone. Before she even said hello, she said, what time we leaving? How? Because she knew I was going to be on it. And she went with me because her son died the same way. Mm-hmm. We went down Minneapolis, did what they wanted, ended up organizing their funeral. And I got Tyler Perry to give a private plane to bring the family in from Houston and back down to Minneapolis and back down to Houston. So it was blacks, folks with money, that financed that. So those would be the two cases that I would think about.
Absolutely. Two last questions. So what would you, what is your suggestion? Because I think recently you said something, what was it? Was it Negro amnesia?
Yeah.
Okay. Negro amnesia. That's where I was like, I knew that's what the question was pulling from. You know, unfortunately, I feel like maybe not my generation, but one more generation after me, there is an entitlement. There is I think they really do forget where we're coming from. I just want to ask you this. What can we do in terms of the next generation of leaders? Because like you said, you're not going to be here forever. I'm not going to be here forever. We have to have another group. Just like I said, they're less than 5% of lawyers are black. They're not that many black activists. I mean, you know, everybody wants to be, you know, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with being a content creator, nothing wrong with being a singer or actress and all these things, or even an athlete. But we do have to have some people come up in the ranks. So what do you suggest? How do we encourage this next group to find someone
to
or
keep
something?
telling our story and telling them that you cannot rise up in whatever profession unless there's an even playing field.
Okay.
And that's why, you know, in Nash Action Network, the group I started and still lead, we have a strong youth division. And I tell them, I said, let me tell you something. Don't be discouraged that most of your friends your age is not going to be activists, because they never was. We never had the majority of black people with us.
That's true.
And so now it's no different. You got to remember when they had the biggest march during the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, 63, it's 250,000 people. We never had a million man march till 95. Right. So don't look for everybody. Okay. The mantle that you got to carry, which is painful, is that you fight for folks that don't ever fight for themselves, and they'll gain from it and won't ever give you credit. You just got to accept that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, one last question. Well, I guess technically two. Would you change anything about your journey? Because sometimes people look back and say, well, maybe if I had done this wouldn't have happened. I'm okay to take accountability and say, maybe I would have done maybe this part differently. Is there anything looking back on your life that you would change?
Yeah, I would have been more cautious about what I would say, because sometimes you just talking what we say smack, just and realizing that if you're out there fighting for causes bigger than you just playing to you know, your crowd of friends. And I would be very careful of the cases I choose to make sure the cases were lawyered right and had done the right research, because we got in some cases that it ended up not being I won't even say they were wrong, but it wasn't the backup right. I'd be more cautious, and I've tried to be that. I tried to course correct as I kept going, but I found that bombast, and they want you to be a clown, and I had to learn, you know, that ain't authenticity. That's trying to ridicule the movement.
Well, you are already our Black Excellence Moment of the week. We typically do a Black Excellence Moment, but you are the Black Excellence Moment of the week. Just wanted to close out with, what are your thoughts? What is your message to the audience? Because we have law students and lawyers and advocates. I mean, it's not just lawyers and law students that listen to this podcast. What is your message about Juneteenth? The importance of it, and, you know, this is really just a recent holiday in the last couple of years that they even gave us, that we didn't even have it before.
And they may try to take it away under this administration.
Right, and how so many people didn't even know they were free is ironic that some of us still don't act as if we're free. So can you speak to that?
The message of Juneteenth.
Okay.
The message of Juneteenth is that they had won the Civil War.
Correct.
Emancipation Proclamation had been signed.
Mm-hmm.
But because they did not have the Union Army down there, they had no way of knowing they were free or operating that they were free. And it was not until the Union Army came in and enforced the order that they were freed, and they could celebrate months after they could have celebrated. Absolutely. And I think the message in 2025 is that I don't care what the present administration says or does, people died to give us the rights to vote, give us the rights to the C-suites, to be the general counsels, not only of our community, but of these major corporations that we spend money. Don't let them take away the freedom that you got. We entitled to. People talk about, well, I don't know, Reverend, we can't beat Trump. We beat Trump in 2020. How you scared of somebody you already beat? So just survive him and keep fighting and play your lane. I don't expect everybody to do what I do, and don't expect me to do what they do. It's like growing up in church. You have a choir, some sing soprano, some sing alto, some sing tenor, some bass. Some can't sing at all, just move their lips. Do your thing. If you're a lawyer, lawyer.
Right.
If you're a corporate lawyer, do it. We need everybody everywhere. I don't expect everybody to do what I do. But I expect them to do what they do to the best of their ability. People died for you to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that is definitely the message. Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, for joining us.
Thank you.
Like I said, we've been wanting you on the podcast for a really long time. Your message definitely resonates. That 2025 and beyond, everybody stay in their lane and do to the best of their ability. I love that. This has been the Black Lawyers Podcast Juneteenth special episode. As always, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone.